Hotel Wednesday var yung mga tax banding sa oven. Banding palag sing tax banding curriculum ting jalat ben kukulukum. I wonder how many of you understood what I just said. I wonder how many of you could make out what I just said. Not very many of you, huh? I mentioned Gillette and Coca-Cola and taxation, but you couldn't understand, right? And that shows us the importance of what? In communication. The importance of what? Understanding words and understanding what's being said, especially when you're dealing with law, especially when you're dealing with statutory law. We're looking into Article 222, subsection 6 of the Income Tax Act. Now look what it says. Acknowledgement of tax debts. A taxpayer acknowledges a tax debt if, conditionally, see, if the taxpayer promises in writing to pay the tax debt, makes a written acknowledgement of the tax debt, whether or not a promise to pay can be inferred from the acknowledgement, and whether or not it contains a refusal to pay. Makes a payment including a purported payment by way of negotiable instrument that is dishonored on the account of the tax debt. Verse 7. For the purposes of this section, an acknowledgement made by the taxpayer's agent or legal representative has the same effect as if it were made by the taxpayer. So what's the law teaching us? What's the statutory power saying? It's saying, keep your mouth shut. It's saying, don't say anything. Don't agree. Don't write back. Don't acknowledge. Don't communicate with them. Why? Because the minute you communicate with them in written form, you acknowledge the fact that you've received their judgment, that you've received their assessment, and you acknowledge the fact in law that you are aware of what they're trying to claim you owe them. Now notice, right, when they send you a notice of assessment, they say, well, if you don't agree with what we're trying to assess you with, well, you can make a notice of objection. Object to it. Object to this and file a notice of objection, which would be in written form. And by you filing that notice of objection, what have you done? You've acknowledged the debt before the minister. You've acknowledged the debt before the CRA. That's why they say that file that notice of objection. Why? Because they're trying to get you to legally acknowledge the debt. Therefore, they can go forward and collect on you. And further to that, right, subsection 7 said that if your legal representative, meaning your lawyer, or the one who prepares your tax forms for you, if they acknowledge in writing that they received the notice of assessment, then it's accounted in law that you received it. It's accounted in law that now you have taken the legal responsibility. And every time you go to someone who prepares your taxes for you, right, H&R Block or wherever it may be, when they receive their return from the government, they send a written email, a written response to them acknowledging that they received the communication, and thereby what? Acknowledging your tax debt. So finally, Kim Kardashian has some good advice. Shh, be quiet. Don't say anything. Don't acknowledge it. Don't return a written form. And don't use some corporate body to fill out your tax form for you, because they're going to acknowledge that debt on your behalf. Canada Revenue Agency Enactment, Article 4.1. The Canada Customs and Revenue Agency is continued as a body corporate under the name of the Canada Revenue Agency. The agency is for all purposes an agent of Her Majesty in right of Canada. All right, so we're seeing, right, that the CRA is a body corporate in law. Well, it's not surprising, right? Because it comes out of the Constitution Act 1867, Article 91, subsection 3, where it says these laws that are being made and these laws that are being put into operation operate within a corporate body. That corporate body, Canada. And now here it's telling us that the Canada Revenue Agency is a corporate body. And the name of the office is Canada Revenue Agency. Further to that, it says that for all purposes, right? An agent of Her Majesty in right of Canada. For all purposes. So concerning your fundamental rights and freedoms, concerning your natural rights, concerning your covenant rights, for all purposes, CRA is an agent of Her Majesty. Therefore, CRA owes the same obligation that Her Majesty has towards natural rights. CRA owes the same obligation that Her Majesty has towards the international covenants. Looking into the International Covenant, Article 1.1, all peoples, and that word people, that designation people here, is referring to the human beings. It's referring to men and women. It's not referring to democratic society. It's not referring to people who are part of the government. It says all peoples have the right of self-determination. Well, what do you mean? I have the right of self-determination. Well, I don't believe you. I'm living here in Canada, right? And they're making all sorts of determinations for me. They've created all these laws and all these rules and regulations, all these statutory powers. And in these statutory powers, right, they're making a whole bunch of determinations for me, including the fact they're determining for me if I have to contribute to the social, economic, and cultural development of Canada. They're making a determination for me if I should pay a tax or not to Her Majesty based upon the principle of mutual benefit. But here you're telling me that I have the right to self-determination? Come on now. Where's this weird thing coming from? Looking at the preamble of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it says, considering the obligation of states under the Charter of the United Nations to promote universal respect for and observance of human rights and freedoms. Oh, hang on. Okay, the obligation is coming against the state party under the Charter of the United Nations. That's what it's saying, right? The Charter of the United Nations brought forth some obligations and placed them upon the state party. And one of those obligations we see in Article 1, it says that we have the right of self-determination. We have the right of self-determination. And notice, and take note here, that this is the first right being expressed in the covenant. This is the first official sentence being brought forth in the covenant. And what does it bring forth? What does it acknowledge? What operation of law is coming forward here? The first sentence in the covenant, after the preamble, it states that all peoples, all of us, all men and women, have the right of self-determination. Our first right that's acknowledged by the covenant, our first right that is brought forth under natural law, under human rights and freedoms, is what? The right to self-determination. That's pretty powerful. Pretty powerful. The Charter of the United Nations, Article 1, subsection 2, to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace. So the United Nations Charter, right, represents, and the United Nations Charter brings forth the fact that they acknowledge the fact that self-determination is a right of the people. Self-determination is a natural right. Self-determination is a fundamental right. Self-determination is a human right. And nobody has the right in law to force your determination. Nobody has the right in law to force you into a class of person, to force you to take recognition as a statutory creature. Looking into the Income Tax Act of Canada, right? Article 2.1, it says an income tax act shall be paid, as required by this act, on the taxable income for each taxation year of every person resident in Canada at the time in the year. And by now you should begin to understand what that means when they say that you're resident in Canada. What are they saying? What's the law saying? Well, it's making a determination for you. It's making a determination for you, and it's saying that you're an officer working in the office of Canada. You're part of the corporate body of Canada, and you're a prescribed person. And did they ask you? Did they say, do you want to play the role of a prescribed person? Did they ask you? Did the executive powers ask you, do you want to be considered a person resident in Canada? No, they didn't, right? They just created the statutory laws, right? And in their statutory laws, they made these legal determinations for you. And guess what? That's against the law. And guess what? That's against fundamental rights. And guess what? That's against the administration of justice. That's against natural law. You're not allowed to make determination for me. I'm the one who makes the determination, not you. That's why in the Charter, of 1982, Article 7, it says everyone has the right not to be deprived. You have a right not to be deprived, and you have to exercise that right. It's not something that they do automatically. They don't just say, okay, well, we have the obligation, so we're not going to make any determinations for you. No, they do it anyways. But you're protected in law. Why? Because natural law says no one can make a determination for you. No one can force you into recognition. And they protect your right, and they safeguard your right under Article 7 of the Constitution Act 1982. Because they put it in your hand, and they say, listen, if you think that your fundamental right and freedom has been limited and abridged, such as in this fashion, where there's been determination made on your behalf, well, you have the right to stand up and say, hang on a second, you're not supposed to do that to me. Hang on a second, you have no operational law that allows you to do that to me. In fact, you have just the opposite obligation. You're supposed to allow me to self-determine. You're supposed to allow me to decide what capacity I'm going to stand before you. And you didn't do it. And you breached my fundamental right and freedom. So understand and embrace this truth, that they have no power, no color of right, no operation of law that allows them to make a determination for you. So whenever you are interacting with the state party and they want to classify you as that statutory creature, whatever it may be, fisherman, hunter, driver, patient, student, resident, taxpayer, all these determinations that they want to make on your behalf, it is illegal. They are not allowed to do that. I know they're doing it, but they're not allowed to do it. And if you call them on it, and if you hold their feet to the fire, so to speak, they have no legal justification for what they're doing. They have no legal stance for what they are doing.